Yeah, and what's this child's last name? Skywalker. Hello and welcome back to the Behind the Screen podcast, which you can now find on Spotify. Today, it's all about prequels, and I'll be talking to Jake Horowitz, a Toronto filmmaker, about his feature films and what making a prequel to your own film means to the filmmaker.
My name is Jake Horowitz. I'm a filmmaker from Toronto, Canada. I started out, I guess, in the industry like 10 years ago or something, doing TV as a writer, and then sort of transitioned from there into making my own stuff and directing and producing. My first feature came out a few months ago. It's called All About Who You Know.
And as usual, I'm joined here by Connor, my good friend. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing good, Gorian. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I was kind of wondering, do you think that people would find it interesting to know what you and I did before this podcast came about? I mean, don't they want to know like our where we came from, what it took to get here?
Everybody's got an origin story.
And no one wants to hear ours. But there are some prequels that we do want to hear about. And today we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly about prequels. Why do we
see what you did there?
You'll see later on what I did there. Why do we like prequels? I mean, are they the same thing as sequels? Is it just the same thing but in the opposite direction? We're going to kind of dissect it because I do think that sequels are on a completely different playing field compared to prequels.
I think that's another thing about what prequels are good is like, well, if they have the same team. Like one of my favorite prequels, and it's technically not a movie, although it's a prequel of a movie. Red Hot American Summer, First Day of Camp.
God, fantastic. I'm so happy you brought that up because I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
And that is a genius prequel.
And it's a great prequel because they know how stupid it is. They know the actors are clearly 15 years older, and yet they're playing like like my parody of cheesy Christmas movies, Cup of Cheer. It's a complete parody, and it's meant to be taken as a joke, and that's why it works.
In Cup of Cheer, is Santa going to be the killer?
Santa's an old drunk man in Cup of Cheer.
You know, the older I get, the more I connect with the old, fat, sad Santas that you see in these movies, and less like the bright, jolly ones. Let's just try and think, what is the oldest prequel that we know? I did a little bit of Googling on this, and from what Google told me, the first, acknowledged prequel was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the younger days kind of vibe. And I know you were telling me before the show that you could think of older ones.
Yeah, so just going by a list that I found, I haven't seen these movies.
Mm-hmm.
Cat People from 1942. Apparently, it had a prequel in 43 called The Seventh Victim, and then Good Morning Boys from 1937 had a prequel the next year called Hey Hey USA. Like, what are these?
These were definitely lost in like the Acadia fire or something when we lost like 50% of all film.
Yeah, exactly.
There are
gone.
So many of these older pre-1950s films where, yeah, I'm sure they made prequels, but we're trying to think of like what made it big.
But you've got the Fistful of Dollars trilogy, the Sergio Leone, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The third film in the trilogy is actually a prequel to A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More.
So you're saying that this is not only the first major prequel, but the first secret prequel.
Yeah. So
you're expecting the third part of this trilogy, and all of a sudden you see Clint Eastwood with a little baby, I assume, at the beginning of that movie, right?
Which sometimes you want a prequel instead of a third installment.
Why not?
Maybe we didn't want Dark Knight Rises. Maybe we wanted
Gotham. Yeah, which we got. But then we're talking about what popularized prequels, and we can basically both agree that the Star Wars franchise solidified the term prequel in terms of, yeah, we are going to start making stories that take place in a different past time period, but in the same universe. And it really was the big first thing that you kind of like, wow, you kind of start racking your brain, like, what else can they make prequels to? Like, maybe Ghostbusters? Like, what else can they do?
And I think it totally works for Star Wars, because Star Wars is arguably more fantasy than sci-fi.
Yeah.
And fantasy is all about world building. And so you have this kind of rich timeline of all these characters and all these different factions and all these different people existing in the same galaxy. So you have a lot to draw from. Same thing with the Lord of the Rings. You have the Hobbit movies. So it's kind of very, I don't want to say easy, but there's more to draw from for a prequel than like say, an action movie.
Yeah.
Rogue One, which is maybe my favorite of the new Star Wars movies.
Yeah, and even kind of picking out some of these prequels that we enjoy, it kind of seems like the prequels that we do pick out are not radically different, but they understand that unlike a sequel that just takes the exact same tone and the exact same almost plot and replicates it, some of these prequels are genuinely surprising. You don't really understand what's going on in terms of the plot coming out. I mean, let's start talking about prequels. What sets them apart from a sequel? Well, first of all, a prequel takes place in the past, which means that often you don't get the same cast because a sequel goes forward in time. You can do Keanu Reeves and John Wick 3 and 4 and 5. But if you do a John Wick prequel, that means you got to get a completely different actor to play a younger version of these characters, which we often see. Things like young Indiana Jones, a lot of these young things where, yeah, let's just take the same interesting character, but rewind their years a couple of years and see how their beginnings were.
Yeah, I mean, for Temple of Doom, they just like didn't want to have Nazis again.
Is that why?
Yeah, they didn't want to have Nazis again as like the main antagonist. So they're like, okay, we can dial this back a few years and show Indiana Jones before the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Now, let me ask you this. I coined a term for this episode. It's not a smart term. It's secret prequel. Did we know that Indiana Jones 2 was a prequel within the context of that movie? I mean,
never.
As a kid, I saw it and you just assume it's a sequel. But yeah, it's a prequel. It's, he's got Short Round with him. But again, as a child, as a kind of just a general viewer, you would never really understand that. So it's one of these like secret prequels that you have.
Right. They're not explicitly talking about the Nazis in
Temple of Doom
because they don't exist yet.
Exactly.
But as a kid, I was like, well, he's in like middle of nowhere India, so like why would there be Nazis or anything there
exactly
anyway?
If anything, there didn't even need to be a prequel. Like you could have called it a sequel and I just would have believed you genuinely.
I don't think a lot of people recognize that it is a prequel.
And talking about Indiana Jones 2, the term secret prequel, we have The Thing. You've seen The Thing, both the old and the new ones. Yeah. That was a secret prequel. People going into the film did not know that it was taking place, spoiler alert, before the original Thing. And it's so perfectly well made in terms of plot that the exact ending of The Thing from 2011 is where The Thing, John Carpenter's, picks up right away.
Yeah,
it's pretty unique.
I saw The Thing 2011 like a long time ago, probably when it came out. I can't. It's the dog at the end, right?
Yep.
That's running to the other Arctic camp, and that's what The Thing from 1982. It kind of starts with is the dog.
It's those little nods that if you're a fan of the original, you're kind of piecing it together as it's going on. You're kind of thinking like, okay, what's going on here? Whoa, there's a dog at the beginning of the last movie. You don't think that they're gonna? Oh no, wait a minute. And another film that did this beautifully. I think it's honestly one of the most well-kept secrets in film.
One of my favorite guilty pleasure movies is actually a really clever prequel.
I hope you're gonna say what I think you're about to say.
Final Destination 5.
Oh yes! Oh my god, dude. Oh man, I freaking love those movies because that was what the fifth one where. You watch it, and you don't know it's a prequel.
Smart.
It's
like
secret
for
prequel.
A stupid movie, it's one of the smartest twists.
Especially when like you see them kind of like you're piecing it together, and you kind of feel like genuinely tricked and fooled, but happy. You go, I can't believe they pulled that off. Like I really wasn't expecting that.
Right, because the whole time you're like, well, they're using old phones and computers, but they're kind of just shying away from it, so you don't ever put it on. It's really smart. And I think that, I love those movies because horror movies are too smart these days, honestly.
Too smart, too scary. Like, I'll watch Final Destination 2.
Stupid movie. You knew what you were getting, and it was a lot of fun.
I think with that, it's very easy to just tack on something like that to the end. It's not exactly woven in through the rest of the movie. Whereas stuff like Prometheus and Alien Covenant seems like very meticulously, maybe not meticulously to some people, but it's more world building and building towards that original movie.
Versus you're saying that you can see a couple execs and producers going, okay.
And then they get on the plane at the end. Like, you could end any movie with someone getting on the same plane, you know?
Yeah, and what's this child's last name? Skywalker. The best part of the prequels was the poster where Anakin's making a Darth Vader shadow. That's the best part of the prequels.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you found it.
Yeah. that thing.
Because there's not much else to redeem.
Speaking about secret prequels, you're not the biggest Fast and Furious fan, from what I understand.
Not true.
I will no longer speak for you.
I love the original Fast and Furious. I've
Right.
probably seen it as much as The Matrix, which is
Really?
a lot.
That is a lot. Well, then
and
you must...
Tokyo Drift too.
Tokyo Drift is a secret prequel where they kind of retconned it into being a prequel, much like you're saying how the film was the third in the franchise, and even watching it, you kind of went, okay, it's an anthology movie about racing now that maybe they'll try and connect it, but it kind of was a reverse prequel where they were kind of scrambling to put the plot together, and they were like, okay, we need to make this movie work within the universe somehow. And honestly, I think the fact that they took that movie and kind of incorporated a prequel around it without them ever considering it in the first place, I think it's pretty ballsy of a company to do and say, hey, listen, we're gonna take this little throwaway sequel we did with a little throwaway cameo at the end, and we're gonna actually try and like integrate it into the actual series, which we all want as Fast and Furious fans. When you saw Fast 5, Fast 6, you were like, oh, wait, they're going to tie in Tokyo Drift somehow?
Yeah.
Pretty exciting.
I think prequels have utility because you can bring back cast that maybe dies in the movie, and they're so popular that people want to see them on screen again and say, well, they're not dead yet in this prequel. Any screenwriter worth their salt, too, is having a lot of backstory on these characters that they're writing for the original movie.
Yeah.
So if it's the same screenwriter or if they're working together, like they have a lot of research on these characters they've put in, what happened in their lives before the original movie. So maybe there's a more solid platform to stand on for them to write a prequel as opposed to a sequel.
Yeah, especially with show Bibles and stuff too. They have things where it's like, oh, what did this character do for the first 10 years? Like if you're a good screenwriter or you're into that stuff, you have this entire, your entire feature film might just be like one iota of the entire universe that you created where, I can do like a sequel or a prequel. It kind of seems like with those filmmakers that they have more... not freedom, but just the knowledge to do things. But again, we see films like Prometheus where we kind of trust the knowledge with Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
But they're kind of messing with things a little bit. It's kind of a little watered down. It's a little confusing. It doesn't follow it exactly.
But in like Alien, in the first Alien, you see that big horseshoe-shaped engineer ship. And until Prometheus came out, you had no idea what civilization that was, and he'd clearly thought it out enough to like have this other engineer race that was plagued by these xenomorphs.
You know that ship in Alien 1 is not the same ship from Prometheus?
What?
Yeah, dude, it's not the same ship.
Not the same ship,
dude. The ship's like, I looked up the names. It's like, the TR3. No, it was like a BL3. It's a different ship apparently.
But it's the same race.
And we come to that argument where building off of these things backwards, with Prometheus, I'm still confused as to whether or not it's a prequel, but like you could call it a sequel and I wouldn't know the difference just because of how convoluted that whole thing is.
I think people especially like start making lore in their own minds when it comes to these really popular movies, especially like Alien, and when you start making prequels, it's kind of sketchy territory because you start kind of stepping on those preconceived notions people have about the story surrounding that movie.
Where you see people watch your movies and then they'll message you or you'll see them talking about it somewhere, and they have all these theories that are like that the writer and the director, you never intended for any of that.
Yeah, it's the classic English class, why is it the balloon blue? Because they're sad, and no, I just wanted to have a blue balloon, I guess,
Yeah, that was the color that was on sale.
What's the most egregious thing that someone's like thought about your film that you're like, way off, Is it like, was it all taking place in the screenwriter's head and it zooms out at the end and the screenwriter wrote the movie actually?
I mean, for a rom-com, there's a lot of twists and unexpected things where the point of the movie is that you never see what's happening next coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ending, for that reason, is very open-ended, and it just sort of cuts off before you get a concrete ending. So a lot of people message me with what they think the theory, like, oh, did he end up with this person? Did he end up with this person?
Yeah.
And like, well, nothing. I stopped writing the script.
We were talking about the good and why people make prequels, but let's tackle everything that is wrong with prequels. And I can sum it up with one clip. The part from Han Solo where they ask him how he got his name. Name? Han! Han Solo. I don't know if I've ever just been like, I could just picture the executives patting themselves on the back for that one, you know?
Yeah, that seems like an executive wrote that in, and I've actually never seen Han Solo. Maybe I'll watch the deep fake when it comes out with Harrison Ford's
way
face.
better, I can assume. But don't you want to know how he got his name and his vest and his laser gun and his ship?
No. After I watched The Force Awakens, guess what?
What?
You're not allowed to have any more of my money. Prequels are of utility because if you make a prequel, you don't have to have any of the original actors.
True.
They can do blank slate, and they can like maybe like in the last scene, like one of the famous people that's top billed in the original movie can be like, hey, I'm here to save the day, or I don't know.
Sometimes it does feel lazy when they're like, hey, here's this Annabelle doll. Don't you want to see the doll maker in the 1950s? Like, no, please no. You know?
Like I watched Ginger Snaps for the first time. Great Canadian werewolf movie. And apparently the third one of that is like a prequel set in 19th century Canada with like the sisters who are the exact same, just
different
in a different time.
Yeah, I really can't stand those prequels where they just set it 100 years in the past and call it a day. The only ones that I've seen recently that are decent enough, I haven't seen the film, but Kingsman came out with a sequel that takes place at the beginning of the Kingsman thing, where I like that because it gives you enough to think about versus if there's a spooky doll from 1950 and a spooky doll from 2000, guess what? It's the same spooky doll. I don't care how it was made. I genuinely don't. Like, it's almost lackluster to see.
But I think especially with horror, you can do really interesting things. I went and saw, by accident, my friend got the wrong tickets.
You wanted to see Minions, right?
Yeah, I was going to see Minions. I was so excited, and then guess what? I'm going to see Annabelle Comes Home. I'm going to see Annabelle Comes Home, and I'm like, I'm so bummed. I'm like fuming, sitting in the seat. I'm like, oh man, I was about to watch those little yeah, exactly, those little yellow cuties, and so. Saw Annabelle Comes Home. It was delightful.
Was it really?
So good. It was again, it rests on a really strong premise of they have all these other haunted objects. And it had Vera Farmiga in it and Patrick Wilson. So it was like the original cast of The Conjuring.
So that's almost like a prequel, but there's also like crossover within the universe.
Heavy crossover.
And I think that is what we absolutely love when we see these franchises that, they'll take it 100 years in the past, but like they'll try and keep it interesting enough that you're not just bored of the time period. Like, it's bringing in people that from the original series and like showing them younger and older and things like that. We love that.
Yeah. I think we talked about sequels before, and the problem is like they just rely too heavily on the plot points from the original.
Yeah.
And maybe the problem with prequels is they don't capture what was special about the original in the first place.
It's either you have to kind of stay so close to the original in terms of feeling that if you don't nail it perfectly, you better be going for a completely different style of movie just to remind people that you're not just a direct copy, but also you're trying to do some new things, some like extra things.
But then in the same Annabelle universe, you get a movie like The Nun, which was like hot trash.
Yeah, it's very hit and miss, especially with these Blumhouse movies.
Yeah, but at least they're trying.
Yeah. Plus, I think one of the great things about sequels is that you can kind of apply your own narrative to it. I'm going to hit you with a sequel right now that was not on any of these lists. And it's probably like the 9th time we're bringing up this movie again, but Adaptation is a prequel to Being John Malkovich because the opening of Adaptation is them filming John Malkovich.
You're kidding me.
So,
you're right.
At the very beginning, you see Charlie Kaufman and you see them directing the scene with all of the John Malkoviches. And then you kind of start thinking like, well, technically this takes place before the film Being John Malkovich came out. Does that make it a sequel or like a weird spin-off or a weird sideways thing? It's kind of the same thing with Bumblebee when it came out because people were thinking it was a prequel, but then the end of the film retcons everything that Michael Bay has done with the franchise. So it's like, I don't like it when I have to think too hard about it like that, you know? I kind of like it when it's like, just tell me if it's a reboot. Tell me if it's like, you know, if it's like a sideways spin-off. Tell me if it's a prequel.
Prequels, sequels, all this boils down to you can't just be like, You can't be lazy about it.
Yeah.
Write a really good original film that fits into the framework of the original movie. That's all. I mean, I say that's all there is to it.
It's easy. It's simple.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jake, for doing the podcast. Where can people find you online, and where can they watch your movies?
So you can find me on Twitter at @byjakeHorowitz, and you can follow both my movies, No Movie and @Cup of Cheer Movie on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. All is now streaming for free on Amazon Prime in the US and on Crave in Canada. And Cup of Cheer comes out November 1st. You can check the trailer right now.
Christmas is coming.
Most importantly, we learned that small towns are way better than big cities.
That's what Christmas is all about.
And thank you, Connor, for coming on the podcast again.
I'll be here anytime.
Where can they find you, either prequely or sequely?
They can find me on Instagram at _Connor Reeves or Twitter at Connor_Reeves.
Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Leave a like and subscribe, and let us know what your favorite prequel is. I prefer Fantastic Beasts to Harry. I can't even. I'm sorry. I can't lie to them.